Here a bullet. If a body is what you want, then here is bone and gristle and flesh. Here is the clavicle snapped wish, the aorta's opened valves, the leap thought makes at the synaptic gap. Here is the adrenaline rush you crave, that inexorable flight, that insane puncture into heat and blood. And I dare you to finish what you've started. Because here, bullet, here is where I complete the word you bring hissing through the air. Here is where I moan the barrel's cold esophagus, triggering my tongue's explosives for the rifling I have in sight of me. Each twist of the round spun deeper. Because here, bullet, here is where the world ends every time. I'd like to take a moment just to sort of preface this second poem. When I was in Iraq, my unit, as you'd said, the 3rd Stryker Brigade combat team, we came back 27 October of 2004. And when we came back, like in a lot of movies, there's a big parade grounds in a field, and the brigade came out, and the colonel stood up in front of everyone, and he gave a speech, and it was sort of our moment to look back and reflect on the year that we had spent. And he took a moment to, and it was poignant, he took a moment to list the names of soldiers we had lost. But he made a glaring omission from my point of view, and that was a soldier he didn't mention, who was in my platoon. And I'd like to read a poem about that soldier. It's called Eulogy. It happens on a Monday at 11:20 a.m. as tower guards eat sandwiches and seagulls drift by on the Tigris River. Prisoners tilt their heads to the west, though burlap sacks and duct tape blind them. The sound reverberates down concertina coils the way piano wire thrums when given slack. And it happens like this, on a blue day of sun, when Private Miller pulls the trigger to take brass and fire into his mouth. The sound lifts the birds up off the water. A mongoose pauses under the orange trees, and nothing can stop it now. No matter what blur of motion surrounds him, no matter what voices crackle over the radio in static confusion, because if only for this moment the earth is stilled. And Private Miller has found what low hush there is, down in the eucalyptus shade, there by the river. That's for Private First Class Bruce Miller. He was born 1980 and died March 22nd of 2004, I'm sorry. The next poem is called 16 Iraqi Policemen. The explosion left a hole in the roadbed large enough to fit a mid-sized car. It shattered concrete, twisted metal, busted storefront windows and sheets, and lifted a BMW chassis up onto a rooftop. The shocking blood of the men forms an obscene art. A mustache alone on a sidewalk, a blistered hand's gold ring still shining, while a medic, Doc Lopez, pauses to catch his breath, to blow it out hard, so he might cup the left side of a girl's face in one hand, gently, before bandaging the half gone missing. Allah must wander the crowd as I do, dazed by the pure concussion of the blast, among sirens, voices of the injured, the boots of running soldiers, not knowing whom to touch first, for the dead policeman cannot be found, here a moment before, then vanished. This next poem, it's called The Hurt Locker. And I was talking with Matt earlier about this. My boss, when I was over there, had this adrenaline rush. And he was a true warrior in the sense of someone who wants to be a warrior. And much more than I was. I don't know if that's even important. But at one point, he and I had a private discussion when the rest of the squad was away. And it was just James talking to Brian. Sometimes we'd sort of strip away the caste system and just talk to each other. And he told me, he said, you know, sometimes, because he was speaking in response to being attacked all the time by mortar shells. Because after a while, sometimes you just get sort of frustrated with someone trying to kill you and you can't do anything about it, because you can't find who these people are. And it's, for some people, it's very, very hard. And At one point he said, we just need to put him in the hurt locker. And I remember that phrase stuck in my head because I didn't know what it meant. It was just this odd phrase, you know. And this poem came out of that. The hurt locker. Nothing but the hurt left here. Nothing but bullets and pain and the bled out slumping and all the fucks and goddams and Jesus Christ of the wounded. Nothing left here but the hurt. Believe it when you see it. Believe it when a 12-year-old rolls a grenade into the room. Or when a sniper punches a hole deep into someone's skull. Believe it when 4 men step from a taxicab in Mosul to shower the street in brass and fire. Open the hurt locker and see what there is of knives and teeth. Open the hurt locker and learn how rough men come hunting for souls. Wish I had something a little lighter to bring you guys back a little bit, but give me time. I'll try and get there. The next one's it's a departure from what we've just done, though. And this next one's called Last Night's Dream. It's for Ishtar. In the dream, her breasts become confused in my lips. I shoot an azimuth to her navel while her fingertips touch me with concussions, as if explosives rang through the nerves of my body, as if I am strung with wire, a huge receiver of UHF radio transmissions, frequency hopping with our tongues as we kiss, and I slide into her with a sound of flashbang grenades that make her eyes cloud over in smoke from the heat of it. In the dream, she kisses Arabic into my skin, and I understand every word of it. I transcribe it backwards into cuneiform and stone. I rename the arteries and veins for every river and wadi from Dohuk north to Basra south. I feel for this geography of pleasure. My tongue is a marker that writes even in the rain, even in salt and sweat, and I write with it now over every curve and turn of her body. In the dream, our orgasm destroys a nation. It leaves thermite and gunpowder in the air above us, a crackling of radio static as we kiss on, long into the denouement of skin and fire, where medevac helicopters fly in the dark caverns of our lungs in search of the wounded. And we breathe them one to another, a deep rotor wash of pain and bandages. Just before I was about to leave, we'd switched off with the unit that came in to replace us, and we gave them all of our ammunition and our vehicles, and basically we were just waiting for a plane to go home. And at that point, I gave myself a time, because up until that time I tried not to think too much about home, but then I started thinking about home, and I wrote this poem from that. And it's called Cole's Guitar. And one part that helped was we were at a small base, and there was a little aid station right around the corner. We were inside an old agricultural building that we'd sort of taken over. And right around the corner was an aid station, and the medic had a guitar that he had bought from one of the locals, and he was playing this blues guitar real late at night when everyone else was sleeping. And I heard it, and it just helped me to maybe write this poem. And it's called Cole's Guitar for Doc Cole. It's the sound from the aid station that wakes me, thin steel from Doc Cole's six-string, a 4 a.m. sound of sour whiskey, heroin and sex and dying. That's what I'm hearing now. Slow as a smoke from a factory in Pittsburgh, slow as a needle in the vein, slow as steam off the bath or a lover with only the blues to sing. I'm hearing America now. I'm hearing Jake breaks off the grapevine, county highways with wheat shocks and Indian summergrass whispering, foghorns under the Golden Gate Bridge, Ella Fitzgerald from a 4th floor window in Birmingham, the handles of a suitcase swinging on the downbeat of a man's footsteps walking out from a Greyhound in Santa Fe. I'm in Wyoming. I'm in New York. I'm leaning in to kiss a woman in the cornfields down by the river. I'm with children drawing portraits in the sand, old men watching fireflies the way Muhammad Ali lay on the canvas and dreamed. That's what I'm hearing, the wind on the redwood coast, old as the ocean and hushed by sheets of fallen snow. Palm mute the strings, Doc. Strum that song until I can see the breath on a bus window, the faces of strangers in the rain, my own hands tracing the features of every one of them, the way ghosts might visit the ones they love, as I am now, listening to America, touching the cold glass. just as I was about to leave, our planes were taking off. We left and we went to an air base. And at this point, the mortar rounds are coming in quite a bit because they know you're sitting there in concentrated groups of troops, so they have what's considered a pretty good target. But we were pretty well sandbagged in, and we just sat it out, waited for our planes, got on our planes, and left. But as that was happening, I sort of pre-wrote this poem partially, and I finished it when I got home. But it's called Night in Blue. At 7,000 feet and looking back, running lights blacked out under the wings and America waiting, a year of my life disappears at midnight. The sky a deep viridian, the house lights below small as match heads burned down to embers. Has this year made me a better lover? Will I understand something of hardship, of loss? Will a lover sense this in my kiss or touch? What do I know of redemption or sacrifice? What will I have to say of the dead that was worth it? That it made any sense? I have no words to speak of war. I never dug the graves in Tel Afar. I never held the mother crying in Ramadi. I never lifted my friend's body when they carried him home. I have only the shadows under the leaves to take with me, the quiet of the desert, the low fog of Balad, orange groves with ice forming on the rinds of fruit. I have a woman crying in my ear late at night when the stars go dim. Moonlight and sand as a resonance of the dust of bones and nothing more. And if you'll indulge me, just a couple more poems. This one's called Caravan. It's near the end of the book. And I think it's self-explanatory, so I'll just go with that. There was one of our, we had a really interesting Iraqi translator. We had several interesting Iraqi translators, but this one guy, Louis, he told me this one Iraqi proverb, and it goes, no matter the barking of the dogs, the caravan marches on. And it seemed fitting to me when I started thinking about caravans and then what we're doing in Iraq. This is what followed. A long queue of container ships stand at anchor in the Persian Gulf. They carry 50 caliber machine guns in packing grease, dunnage, ammo crates, millions of bullets laid side by side, toilet paper, insecticides, light bulbs. The dockside floodlights hum with mosquitoes and malaria. Cranes hoist connexes onto flatbed trucks which line Highway 1 from Kuwait City to Dohuk in the north, just south of Turkey. With enough boxes of food for 130,000 meals, 2 to 3 times a day for a year. An army of commerce, a fleet of corporations with the Pacific as its highway. These are the boxes we bring to Iraq. Today in Baghdad, a bomb kills 47 and wounds over 100, leaving a crater 10 feet deep. The stunned gather body parts from the roadway to collect in cardboard boxes, which will not be taped and shipped to the White House lawn, not buried under the green sod thrown over, box by box emptied into that rich soil in silence, while a Marine sentry stands guard at the National Monument, tomb of the unknown, our own land given to these, to say, if this is freedom, then we will share it. And one poem for you, because I know you want something a little lighter, so just to sort of finish it off. When I was there, I found an incredible wealth, as I'm sure many of you have, if you've been looking into this, of history. There's so much in antiquity that we can learn from that entire part of the world, or all parts of the world, but there's so much that we can learn from there. And I learned a little, and fascinated by it. And you'll find little snippets of that all the way throughout the book. I hope it maybe will lead you to other places if those are some things you haven't come across already. But there was a person named Abu Ali Hassan ibn al-Haytham. He's known as Al-Hazan to the West, and he was an eminent physicist whose contributions to science remain vital and relevant to the present day. But this is a long time ago. It's called Al-Hazan of Basra. If I could travel 1,000 years back to August of 1004, to a small tent where Alhazen has fallen asleep among books about sunsets, shadows, and light itself. I wouldn't ask whether light travels in a straight line, or what governs the laws of refraction, or how he discovered the bridgework of analytical geometry. I would ask about the light there is within us, what shines in the mind's great repository of dream, and whether he studied the deep shadows daylight brings, how light defines us. That's all I have to say. I'd like to thank everyone from Mr. What's that? Would you like more? I didn't want to put people to sleep. There's plenty more. I was kind of worried that we'd be. Sure, absolutely. Was there any that people in particular wanted to have read? Yes.
I read one on the internet about a woman who was taken to Germany and she dies, and then the surgeons find.
Yes.
It's very profound. It moved me personally.
I think it's on the Alice James website. There's two poems on there. There's Here Bullet, and then there's also that one's called The Surgeon's Poem. That's on page 15. There were some parallels that I tried to do in the book as well. So in this particular poem, Thalia Fields is a changed a name from the actual person's name because I didn't know her personally, and I didn't want her family to come across it. Unlike with Miller, what I read earlier with Eulogy, I discussed it and tried to make sure that it was respectful. But I don't know her, so I changed it, and that's sort of where that poem comes from. But she was a cook, and she had beautiful eyes. She had really pretty eyes. She wore these contacts, and she had dark eyes, like brown. She was African American. I'm not sure where from originally, and she wore these green contacts, and her eyes were startling. And I know because every time when I would come in to get food at this one place, she was the head count person, so she would count people coming in. But unfortunately, one of her jobs was to transport food from base to base, and there was a roadside bomb that got her. So this poem comes after that. It's called AB Negative, the Surgeon's Poem. Thalia Fields lies under a gray ceiling of clouds, just under the turbulence, with anesthetics dripping from an IV into her arm. And the flight surgeon says, the shrapnel cauterized as it traveled through her, here, breaking this rib as it entered, burning a hole through her left lung to finish in her back. And all of this she doesn't hear, except perhaps as music, that faraway music of people's voices when they speak gently and with care. A comfort to her on a stretcher in a flying hospital en route to Landstuhl, just under the rain at midnight. And Thalia drifts in and out of consciousness as a nurse dabs her lips with a moist towel, her palm on Thalia's forehead, her vitals slipping some, as burned flesh gives way to the heat of blood. The tunnels within opening to fill her, just enough blood to cough up and drown in. Thalia sees shadows of people working to save her, but cannot feel their hands, cannot hear them any longer. And when she does close her eyes, the most beautiful colors rise in darkness, tangerine washing into Russian blue, with the droning engine humming on in a dragonfly's wings, island palms painting the sky in an impossible hue, with their thick brushes dripping green. A way of dealing with the fact that Thalia Fields is gone, long gone, about as far from Mississippi as she can get, 10,000 feet above Iraq, with a blanket draped over her body and an exhausted surgeon in tears, his bloodied hands on her chest, his head sunk down, the nurse guiding him to a nearby seat and holding him as he cries, though no one hears it, because nothing can be heard where pilots fly in blackout, the plane like a shadow guiding the rain, here in the droning engines of midnight. Yeah?
Can you read what every soldier should know?
It's interesting. Before we left, we had these briefings, a gazillion briefings. there are a few people, I guess, who might be going over there from Maine, and they'll go through some of the same briefings. It was interesting because they would go through our secret security clearance checklist and see who was on the list of the people in the room. So if it was all of us and we were all in the unit, then, you know, this row here, well, you didn't pass the clearance thing, so you couldn't go. And I thought, oh, we're going to learn something interesting, something top secret. I went in there and I didn't learn anything that I thought was top secret, but it was important stuff, but I don't know, didn't seem national security secrets or anything like that. But it's from that, this is where the poem sort of began. And then when I was over there, I began to learn more about what the title says, which is what every soldier should know. And it has a Jean-Jacques Rousseau epigraph that says, "To yield to force is an act of necessity, not of will. It is at best an act of prudence. If you hear gunfire on a Thursday afternoon, it could be for a wedding or it could be for you. Always enter home with your right foot. The left is for cemeteries and unclean places. Oguf tara armik is rarely useful. It means stop or I'll shoot. Sabah khair is effective. It means good morning. Inshallah means Allah be willing. Listen well when it is spoken. You will hear the RPG coming for you. Not so the roadside bomb. There are bombs under the overpasses, in trash piles, in bricks, in cars. There are shopping carts with clothes soaked in fugas, a sticky gel of homemade napalm. Parachute bombs and artillery shells sewn into the carcasses of dead farm animals. Graffiti sprayed under the overpasses. I will kill you, American. Men wearing vests rigged with explosives walk up, raise their arms, and say, Inshallah! There are men who earn $80 to attack you, $5,000 to kill. Small children who will play with you, old men with their talk, women who offer chai, and any one of them may dance over your body tomorrow. Thanks. Any more particulars? Excuse my voice, a little crack there, a little more. Yeah.
There was one in which you spoke about the word habib meaning love.
Yeah, it's pretty long. That's like a 5-pager, I think, 2,000 pounds, I believe it is. I like that poem. That's probably my favorite in the book. But
Go ahead.
yeah, okay. If you guys get tired, you know, go to the back. There's a little nap area, you know, anything like that. Just, I'm happy to oblige. This poem, for me, I felt was the centerpiece of the entire book, and I felt like it was very important because with the book, I tried very much to sort of, I won't be the first to ever have said this in the history of humankind, but the war, it affects everyone around it like a rock in a pond. You know? So in a similar way, this bomb going off impacted everyone around it. And I just used that as like an encapsulated moment. And I tried lyrically to sort of freeze frame moments like maybe like a cinematographer might do. And that's how each stanza is set up. So it's called 2,000 Pounds, Asher Square, Mosul. It begins simply with a fist, white-knuckled and tight, glossy with sweat, with 2 eyes in a rearview mirror watching for a convoy. The radio, a soundtrack that adrenaline has pushed into silence, replacing it with a heartbeat, his thumb trembling over the button. A flight of gold, that's what Safwan thinks, as he lights a Miami, draws in the smoke, and waits in his taxi at the traffic circle. He thinks of summer 1974, lifting pitchforks of grain high in the air, the slow drift of it like the fall of Shafa's hair. And although it was decades ago, he still loves her, remembers her standing at the canebrake where the buffalo cooled shoulder deep in the water, pleased with the orange cups of flowers he brought her. And he regrets how so much can go wrong in a life, how easily the years slip by, light as grain, bright as the street's concussion of metal, shrapnel traveling at the speed of sound to open him up in blood and shock, a man whose last thoughts are of love and wreckage, with no one there to whisper him gone. Sergeant Ledoux of the National Guard speaks but cannot hear the words coming out. And it's just as well his eardrums have ruptured, because it lends the world a certain calm. Though the traffic circle is filled with people running in panic, their legs a blur like horses in a carousel, turning and turning the way the tires spin on the Humvee flipped to its side. The gunner's hatch he was thrown from, a mystery to him now, a dark hole in metal the color of sand. And if he could, he would crawl back inside of it. And though his fingertips scratch at the asphalt, he hasn't the strength to move. Shrapnel has torn into his rib cage, and he will bleed to death in minutes. But he finds himself surrounded by a strange beauty, the shine of light on the broken. A woman's hand touching his face, tenderly the way his wife might, amazed to find a wedding ring on his crushed hand, the bright gold sinking in flesh, going to bone. Rashid passes the bridal shop on a bicycle with Sefa beside him. And just before the air ruckles and breaks, he glimpses the sidewalk reflections in storefront glass. Men and women walking and talking, or not. An instant of clarity, just before each of them shatters under the detonation's wave, as if even the idea of them were being destroyed, stripped of form, the blast tearing into the mannequins who stood as though husband and wife only a moment before, who cannot touch one another, who cannot kiss, who now lie together in glass and debris, holding one another in their half-armed embrace, calling this love, if this is all there will ever be. The civil affairs officer, Lieutenant Jackson, stares at his missing hands, which make no sense to him. No sense at all, to wave these absurd stumps held in the air where just before he'd blown bubbles out the Humvee window, his left hand holding the bottle, his right hand dipping the plastic ring in soap, filling the air behind them with floating spheres like the oxygen trails of deep ocean divers. Something for the children, something beautiful. Translucent globes with their iridescent skins drifting on vehicle exhaust and the breeze that might lift one day over the Zagros Mountains. That kind of hope. Small globes which may have astonished someone on the sidewalk 7 minutes before Lieutenant Jackson blacks out from blood loss and shock, with no one there to bandage the wounds that would take him all the way home. Nearby, an old woman cradles her grandson, whispering, rocking him on her knees as though singing him to sleep, her hands wet with their blood. Her black dress soaked in it as her legs give out and she buckles with him to the ground. If you'd asked her 40 years earlier if she could see herself an old woman begging by the roadside for money here, with a bomb exploding at the market among all these people, she'd have said, to have your heart broken one last time before dying, to kiss a child given sight of a life he could never live, it's impossible. This isn't the way we die. And the man who triggered the button, who may have invoked the prophet's name or not, he is obliterated at the epicenter. He is everywhere. He is of all things. His touch is the air taken in, the blast and the wave, the electricity of shock. His is the sound the heart makes quick in the panic's rush, the surge of blood searching for light and color. That sound the martyr cries, filled with the word his soul is made of, Inshallah. Still hanging in the air over Asher Square, the telephone line snapped in two, crackling, a strange incantation the dead hear as they wander confused amongst one another, learning each other's names, trying to comfort the living in their grief, to console those who cannot accept such random pain, speaking Habib softly, one to another there in the rubble and debris, Habib, over and over, that it might not be forgotten. Habib is the word for love. So, yeah, thanks. I like that poem. Any others? Can you take yours? How are we looking? Yeah? Yeah. I'm listening to this. You might like that one as well. I think there's a lady up here who might like this poem as well. How about I'll read this one last poem and then maybe we'll take a question and answer session if they like. It's called Jamil, and it's the Arabic transliteration would be beautiful, or the English transliteration of the Arabic would be beautiful. Cowbirds rest in the groves of date palms, whole flocks of them, white as flowers blossoming into wings when the wind rises up. Thistleweed bursts open in purple while honeybees drone and hover over the yellowing early summer field. They say to produce 1 pound of honey, bees must travel from flower to hive at least 12,000 times. Such patience, waiting for this storm to be carried over the far mountains. When the earth darkens and the sky lowers and cowbirds shield themselves under a wing, the nectar swaying heavy within the closed flower, the hive humming its prayer under the rain's falling hush. That's it. Thank you for having me read. And thanks to Matt with the Fish House, the Macmillan House for sponsoring me and having me for their very kind dinner, and to Bowdoin College, and especially to all of you good folks who have come here this evening to let me share my work with you this time, and maybe next time share your work with me. Are there any questions? Yes. Trying to get sleep. Yeah. No, the next book is possibly. I want to go to Russia. I speak a little Russian, and I want to go there and just see what happens from there. So that's a possibility, but it'd be a couple years down the road. Yeah. Yes.
When listening to some of your poems, I thought I might have heard, influences of other American poets, and I was wondering if you have any favorite poets or any that you think have influenced your writing.
The same question came up earlier today, and specifically with like war poetry, that sort of, if it's a genre, I would say like not poetry, but Tim O'Brien would be my biggest influence with fiction, like Going After Cacciato, and some books along that line. He's a fantastic author. And Yusef Komunyakaa, and it's a list that I often say, Bruce Weigel, Song of Napalm. Yusef's book is Dien Kai Dao, I'd look for that one. And a little bit of Wilfred Owen, and a lot of Walt Whitman when he's in the hospitals caring for the wounded, things like that. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Yes.
What do you think about the current rhetoric in Washington about the war, especially about withdrawing from soldiers?
I'm not sure about the word rhetoric. It sounds loaded to me. But honestly, I do want to engage the question because I think it's crucial. And I guess it would go back to my belief about the whole war, which is this is just my personal opinion. I felt that the war in Iraq, I'm not a pacifist, but I do feel that it was, that preemptive action is not a strategy which the United States should use abroad or use at all. As a leader in the world, I don't think that's how we lead, and I think it was a mistake. But as far as to answer your specific question, I think that there's nothing wrong. When going to war, we had specific goals. There were weapons of mass destruction. There was a certain list of missions that we needed to accomplish, and there were goals that needed to be done that drove us to go there. Why can we not have specific goals outlined and to know when those goals are met? There are people that will say, well, if we let them know what the goals are, the terrorists will wait, and then they'll take over at that point. Well, if we set structures in place that will ensure that once we leave, there are structures in place which can handle those problems when they come, then I feel fine with that. The Iraqi people are very brave, and Anybody who will stand outside a line at a police office knowing the history as well as all of us know of the bombs going off out there and still go up there and wait to sign an application to get a job is very brave, you know. I had a flak vest with very good armor. I had a lot of firepower to protect me. I had 8 other people to fight by my side to protect me. I wasn't standing on the street without all of that, you know. So I believe in a timeline to bring us out. I don't know what it would be because I don't know enough of the particulars, but yes. Huh. Yeah.
Was there any time where you saw yourself in the other army, perhaps?
How do you mean? How do you mean?
Was there any time where you
Can you say that one more time, just to?
when you saw yourself in the other soldiers?
You mean like saw myself in the Iraqis position?
Perhaps, yeah.
I tried to a lot, actually. They're just like us, you know. They're men and women that have babies and they have best friends and they have people they have crushes on and whatever, you know. They don't want a police car pulling up behind them just like we don't, you know. Your police car gets right behind you, even if you've done nothing wrong. You just don't want them behind you, you know. Much less a big 20-ton vehicle driving through the streets with foreigners in it. You know, they just want to go to work. They want to go home. They want to enjoy life and try and get on with their lives. So, of course, I think like you probably, I'm sure as well, would be able to empathize with that. Yeah. And as far as the Iraqi soldiers, I felt they were very brave because I would go back to my base and then eventually I would fly home. But many of them, for example, I was stationed just for a short time. Our platoon had a small mission to take over a company-sized base, fire base, just south of Mosul. And right beside us, there was a big building and a big complex, and there were 400 Iraqi National Guardsmen that worked there. Well, by day they would be there, but at night they all went home. There was only like 12 people there, which wasn't good for us because it allowed people to just roll up on us. It was much more precarious for us. But the reason I bring this up is because when they got off work, they had their uniforms on and they had their guns and they had to sling them over their rifles and then walk out down the road because most of them didn't have enough transportation and try and hitch a ride out on the road on the main highway out in the middle of the desert. And it takes a specific amount of bravery to get in a car, drive in a taxi, get out of your car, go into your house, knowing your family. People now know that you're a soldier. And if they don't agree with you, not only are you, do you know what I mean? There's so many questions that evolve out of that I'm thankful I didn't have to deal with. So I tried to empathize with them. And I tried to empathize with them. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm interested in the process of writing poems in the middle of a battlefield. It just strikes me as being so incongruous in a way to, to be surviving in that situation over there and yet be able to think like a poet. And I wonder if you would mind addressing that.
Yeah. For me personally, I'd written a lot before that, so it was sort of a natural mode for me to sort of work with things in my life. But at the same time, you're right, there's things that happen. There were periods where I wasn't able to write. We would be far too busy. Missions almost 24 hours a day where we were just barely a little sleep or anything like that. But there were lots of times where a soldier's life often is filled with just boredom, pure boredom. And so there was a lot of time to sort of contemplate and think about things and begin to develop ideas. I wrote in the book I think I mentioned earlier, there's a poem called In the Leopold Scope. I wrote that sitting in a tower staring out at the desert. And, but there were other poems where we'd be on missions. I think there's a poem called Mill, which talks about women harvesting salt from the side of the road. Because there's these salt flats in the water. As it's evaporating, they scoop up all the salt and they put it in buckets and then take it out from there. And I remember driving by them every day because we were escorting convoys through Baghdad, and it was just south of Baghdad. And I was just struck by that, the image of them. And it slowly evolved into the first 2 lines of the poem. And then over time, as I was there, it developed into the poem itself. But the 2 lines I wrote, standing in the hatch, I took a piece of paper out of my pocket, and I was keeping watching what I was doing, but I wrote them down real quick and stuffed it back in my pocket, and then worked on it later. Usually by night, as Matt had mentioned, I'd be tired, but I could get away with 20 or 30 minutes of not sleeping, get out my little flashlight and write down ideas. So that's how I went about it. And there was sort of the idea of, for me, there was sort of, I think I spoke of this at the Millen House earlier today, there was the idea of death sort of in the background of everything. So I felt sort of pressured, I can't exactly explain why, but I felt pressured to try to write as quickly as possible and not to wait 7 years later, as many poets often do. So the book may suffer from some lack of that type of reflection, but I hope not. I hope it brings some immediacy and impact of how I felt. So maybe there's a different book I would write 7 years from now. I don't know.
How did you end up in Iraq, and how did you feel when you found out that that was where you were going?
It was a very turbulent thing because I was hoping, I knew that we would be scheduled to go somewhere, but because I was in the peacetime army and then we became a wartime army. But I had really hoped that we would be sent to Afghanistan because I had less qualms about going to Afghanistan, and I felt that, as I'd mentioned before, that preemptive action wasn't the way to go. So up until the day I left, I mulled over prison time, and I called my parents on the phone and talked with them a lot, and good friends. It was difficult. So there was a question in the back, but I think
Do you feel like you gave you the insight into the motivations of the insurgents?
Only in the sense that I don't think it can be diluted down to one specific sort of reason for why someone would become an insurgent. There might be an Iraqi that could stand here in front of me, and then I could see that if he or she explained to me their reasoning, I might find them to be a patriot of Iraq who doesn't believe that there should be an occupying power taking control of their country. There might be another person who's starving and needs money and will shoot at me, but maybe he won't try to hit me because he knows he'll get that $80 that he's been promised. Then there's another one who might have come from another country, but I think that's much rarer than what's put out in the news. There are some, but the majority of people are Iraqi people who are the quote-unquote insurgents. I'm not sure what to title them exactly because, like I said, there's multifaceted reasons for, and then it just goes along. There's so many different reasons for why each person picks up a rifle, I think. So I wish I could answer your question, but I don't really know. Yeah. Yes, sir.
In the books you reference the Epic of Gilgamesh and the poem, you quote a poem by Fahil al-Azawi.
Yes.
Were you aware of a literary tradition, an in-place literary tradition while you were there, and are there some writers from Iraq that we should be reading?
Yes. I wish I had my bag with me. If any of you are interested in the second part of that question, which is if you'd like to know some of the suggestions I would give for reading from their literature, maybe see me right after, and I have a book in my bag. In fact, I was going to read a poem from that, but it just escaped me and I forgot to do it. I wanted to read a poem from an Iraqi artist also. But there's a great book that to answer the first part of your question, when I went over there, I had a book called Iraqi Poetry Today. I'd studied the Epic of Gilgamesh in different forms, or different translations, from back in college and before that a little bit. And I really love that epic. It's a very interesting piece of work. And so that for me, that was like a really important poem, like the poem 2,000 Pounds is important for me. And the editor actually argued, she didn't want it in there, she thought it would slow things down and stuff, but I argued to keep it in there because I thought it was important to me. Yeah. What's that? Thank you. I guess a lot of people had some problems with the last stanza in it, but if you look at it, the structure of it is in parallel structure. There's 4 stanzas, and the first 2 are meant to sort of play off the last 2. And so there was multiple arguments to keep that poem the way it is. So, yes, sir.
Some of your poems take the perspective of the Iraqi people. I wonder, did you have much interaction with the Iraqi people? You get the feeling watching the news that our soldiers really can't.
It's very difficult, especially in a job like mine where you're in the infantry. Our job the interaction was to arrest people, or you do have some though. We would do, and this may not seem like interaction, but it started like this. We would often, when we first got there, we would just do random checkpoints. just to see if people had weapons in their cars and stuff. So we'd be driving down the road out in the country somewhere near a town, and we would just stop and make up a hasty checkpoint. And then we'd stop all the cars coming in and search the cars and talk with the people. And I tried to be as, the way we had it was we would have a tough guy and a nice guy. The team leader was the nice guy. And then I would have my machine gunner had to just be quiet, not say a word, wear his glasses, and just stand there looking tough. So that they knew that there was force possible, but then I would put my weapon down and have my hands free and talk with them. And we tried to be as respectful as possible. For example, you're not supposed to ask the ladies out of the car. You're supposed to, only the men are supposed to be asked out of the car, so we'd do that as much as possible. But I do remember there were a couple of dumb things that we did that now looking back, I just kind of got lucky. I was walking in Mosul around a street corner. There were just 3 of us because we went to get some ice, because we wanted some ice really bad, and it was dumb. We should have had the whole squad when we did this. We just sort of snuck out, me and my boss and one guy. And as we were going there, I looked and I saw there's a barber shop, and I just sort of jokingly said to my boss, I was like, oh, I need a haircut. And he's like, you want a haircut? I was like, yeah. And he's like, get a haircut. So I walked in, and that was the only time I was ever able to go by myself into some type of establishment. It's still the uniform, so you can't get across that. I mean, there's still all the problems with that. But I sat there, waited my turn, and then there was a gentleman that was kind enough to let me go in front, and he was from the local university and spoke some English. And so he would translate for the barber, and we talked. I set my weapon down, and the other 2 guys were pulling security outside. But for a minute, there was Iraqi television, a guy cutting my hair, and a nice college professor talking to me. And it was nice, you know. What's that?
Shave with a straight edge.
Yeah. I was a little nervous, but at the same time, they were nice people. No, I found a lot of nice people in Iraq, and the majority of my interactions were with translators that we had, the Iraqi translators. I met a fascinating gentleman from that had served. He was a special forces soldier for the Iraqi military, fought against Iran, and he was captured, sent to Tehran, and he told me the stories of learning Dutch from another prisoner and then English during his years of captivity, and how he sent north, and there's ski slopes in Tehran, and there's all kinds of things I had no idea of. And there's some fascinating people we met. So, only all too brief though. So, yes?
Wallace Stevens famously wrote in Sunday Morning, "Death is the mother of beauty." And I'm wondering if that dictum is particularly true of people who are writing poems about combat and war. And I notice in some of your poems you are trying to get out of that straitjacket by writing about life, especially in the poems that really aren't expressly about combat. The birds, flowers, the insistent perseverance of life. And I just wondered how much you felt constrained by the death straitjacket.
And the romance of war, you know, the romance and the poetry of war was kind of a straitjacket. And I tried specifically, there was a question earlier that someone asked me if I had changed my style when writing this book. And it is a drastic departure for me. It's very stripped down narrative, and a lot of the embellishments, and then maybe a lot of the musicality I might have put in the language before was deliberately held in check. So that, because it felt honest to me, I don't know. And it seemed spare, sort of like the land in Iraq. Even, it's difficult to get away from the straitjacket though, because even in the poem that you discuss with the bees and the storm in that poem for me was sort of war. And the storm going over the mountains is sort of just an escape from it or a release from it. So it's hard for me to not even to preclude it from that one. So I don't know if I succeeded, you know, even in that.
What's been the reaction of veterans who served in Iraq to your poems? Have you had any reaction?
So far, overwhelmingly positive. Kind of surprising to me, but not quite so. There were some George Bush quotes and things that I sort of took. There were wood chips that fell by the side of the editor's table, I think wisely so. And so that way it could be more inclusive and invite people that might disagree with me. But the veterans, to answer your question specifically, for example, the U.S. Air Force Academy, there's a lieutenant colonel who's teaching that. He replaced that book, surprisingly, for, he took my book and replaced Beowulf from the spring syllabus. And, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and then the West Point, I just received an essay from one of the students who compared the work with another author, contemporary author. And I guess I'd set it up, I said I'd be available to any of the students if they want to ask questions. Nobody contacted me, but he said that 30 students ended up using the poem, a particular poem in comparison and contrast. So even in the academies of learning for the officer corps of the future, it's, I guess it resonates in some way, or is useful in some way, I hope. There was a question here first. Yes, sir?
Along the same lines, when you were writing the poems, did you have a sense of what your audience might be, or has that surprised you, where it's gone, and who seems to be interested in it and reading it? Or did you reflect on that as you were writing it?
Yes and no. The audience I expected was first, of course, just writing at the moment, but as editing and sort of working on them and putting the final mold, I definitely wanted like the person at the bus stop, whoever that it may be, me or whoever. If I sat at a bus stop and read a poem to somebody, I wanted it to be open and accessible, you know, because I think I mentioned some other people earlier tonight. My dad's a welder. My mom was the second bartender, female bartender in the state of California. And I come from a working class family, you know, and I want people, but as I said earlier, that isn't a lack of intellect and sophistication. It's just a different approach towards that sophistication.
So you're hoping it would be accessible to?
I wanted to reach an academic audience as well as people who might not read poetry, and I'm finding, fortunately, some people who don't really read poetry that much. And if they're going to read poetry, some of them sort of like my stuff. So that's pretty cool, you know, to build our audience, you know. So I'm very thankful for that. If that's working, it seems to be so far so good. So, any other questions? Was there one over back there? Wasn't there? No. Great. Well. That's it for me. I would like to say, as I suggested to the Macmillan House, regardless of your political affiliation, if you have it in your means and if you have the time to do this, you might want to go online, and it's all lowercase, it's one word, it's booksforsoldiers.com. Well, there's a dot in between, but it's booksforsoldiers.com, and it's very easy to do, but a lot of soldiers like myself, when I was over there, I opened up, there's a very easy sort of registration form, and I could put in a subject like art history or something, or music, or I could put in a specific author and a title, which I did one time. And then, surprisingly, weeks later, some anonymous person in America, like maybe one of you good folks, bought a book for me, and it showed up, and I was able to read it while I was there. So it's booksforsoldiers.com. You might influence somebody, you know, or make their day. Yeah. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. What's that? Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, thanks.